Okay, so here we are going over Christopher's assignment. So because he was most highly ranked in two of the categories, the aesthetic and the interest, I'll call it conceptual. Um, so anyway, so Christopher took an interpretation. It's a conceptual interpretation, he said, of the goddess Kali. And the repeated pictures of the arm. And I think that this is really interesting. I think it's cohesive. I think he took an idea, and it's got this kind of, it's not just a bunch of pictures of arms or a specific person. He's connected it to kind of a certain kind of religious iconography that has stories behind it. And I think all of that is really an interesting and effective way to start. So I'm interested in, okay, so we start there, and I think it's successful, and I'm really excited that you've taken on something challenging like that. So a few of the things that I think would be interesting to me to see this develop further would be the story itself. And it doesn't necessarily need to include the story. I mean, that's always kind of an interesting question as to whether you want it to be so literally attached or whether that's just a point of departure. So, Christopher, that's something for you to think of. This was an assignment. Whether you want to continue with it or not is another question. But as far as your own creative development, how important is it that people know the specific story or narrative of this goddess, and how much is it just a taking off point and you don't really need people to know that? So that's one thing to think about. The other thing is to think about eventually with something like this, how would you ideally see it manifest? How would you like people to experience it? I have you guys put them on these PDFs. It's rather low res. How do you imagine the work being seen? How would it ideally someone experience it, as a book or as a bunch of pictures on the wall or something that they would click through? So that's something I would tell you to think about. And then I would ask you to think about how important is this particular person that you've photographed? She's got distinctive tattoos. Is she someone important to you? Is this in some ways a portrait of her? I mean, I would argue it is a portrait. So she's acting as somebody, but it also has this specificity to it that's interesting to me. And finally, the last thing that I might comment on with this is I do think that the color is a little bit off, and it gets tricky with screens, and this is definitely a limitation of this method of educating with photography. But I'm feeling like the colors it's a little blue, and maybe that's part of it, but I think it's actually this bluish, yeah, it's blue. It's kind of a bluish color, and I think that, so you get some like reds and purples. I think it could be a little cleaner with the color. I mean, I guess I would just like to see it a little slightly different. I can see that maybe the blue was part of the intent. And it has the effect of making it cold and making her seem cold. Almost like cadaver-like in some of them. So that's something to think about. Maybe you like that. Maybe just try it with other colors. But generally speaking, really adventurous, really successful first assignment, and I look forward to seeing what you do next and where you go from here. So well done, Christopher.